So I've probably made about probably over 20 trips to the city over the course of the last 5 years, and I'm currently coming off of a month-long stay here in Brooklyn. That being said, I'm going to give you 10 of the tips that I've learned and also witnessed in my time here visiting the city, so that when you visit for the first time, you can have the best trip ever. Don't. Don't spend all of your time in Midtown Manhattan, specifically right around Times Square. New York City is made up of 5 different boroughs which house over 8 million people. These 5 boroughs include Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Long Island, and then the one that everyone knows about, Manhattan. Manhattan is typically what people think of when they think of the big city here in New York. Most of the classic things you think of, such as the Empire State Building, Times Square, Central Park, all those things do exist in Manhattan, so it's easy to say that a tourist could spend most of their time there, but I still think it's worth exploring the other boroughs because that's where you'll feel a little bit more of that classic New York flavor versus the hyper-capitalized New York City tourism shoved down your throat. Times Square itself is somewhere I would suggest spending at a max 2 hours because when you really think about it, what is it? I definitely would not suggest eating there if you have to go. I think that maybe for your first trip, it's something worth seeing, but it's definitely not something that you're going to see any local New Yorkers hanging out and being excited to see. Okay, since we talked about venturing out of just Manhattan, you're asking me how, and I'll tell you. Let's talk about point number 2. Don't be afraid to utilize the subway system. Now, if you're from Europe or most other countries around the world, you're probably more accustomed to public transportation, but us Americans really aren't that used to it. I personally am born and raised in California, and public transportation is just not a word that ever comes across our minds. The subway is a pretty easy system to navigate. Granted, maybe the smells won't be the cleanest and the sights won't be the best, but it is $2.90 per one-way ride all over the city. If you have Apple Maps or Google Maps, you'll be able to find step-by-step directions, including where to transfer and street directions to the train stops themselves. Also, you don't need a subway or metro card anymore. They've started a new program where instead of using a card, you're able to use tap on your phone or even tap on your card. And if you have taken over 12 rides in the time span of 7 days, they stop charging you, which is akin to the price of what 1 week of using a Metro card would be. It's part of the experience. If you're coming to New York and you really want to say you got a full flavor of your time spent, then you got to make sure you hear some subway performers, and you might even see some crazy things in the subway that you'll have stories about for the rest of your life. Number 3, I'm extending on the subway point. Make sure that you plan for extra time to get from point A to point B whenever you're traveling around the city. This technically goes for using Ubers and riding in cars as well, but specifically for the subway. The subway is on its own schedule, and you got to remember, although this is not a big city in terms of mileage, it's a big city in terms of chaos. So if at any given time, there can be subway delays, there can be stops that are crowded, there can be a whole myriad of things, and I would hate to see you plan for a 20-minute ride on a train taking exactly 20 minutes because there's all types of things that can happen in the city. So make sure you plan a buffer on both sides if you have somewhere that you need to be with exact time. For my next tip, I want to say this. Do not think that while you are a tourist in the city, the whole city is also full of tourists. Some cities are more prone to just be there for tourism and travel. Think Cancun, Mexico, or Las Vegas, Nevada, where everybody is pretty much visiting to just be a tourist. New York is not that city. New York is a combination of hustle and bustle 24/7. So when you're in these crowded areas, I'm thinking Union Square, I'm thinking Fifth Avenue, I'm thinking even somewhat around Times Square. Do not just stop abruptly in the middle of the sidewalk to take a picture, to use your phone, to do whatever. To be a polite tourist and not inconvenience everyone around you, pull off to the side of the street to take your picture, take your phone call, do whatever else, because people will get angry at you if you're just stopping in the middle of the street and stopping the flow of traffic, because everybody in New York has somewhere to be, or at least acts like they have somewhere to be at all times. Okay, so next up, I don't know if this counts as a tip for while you're here or more so before you're here, but do some research and plan. Now, you guys, this is the most busy and chaotic city in the world. While there are always things to get into and things that you can do super last minute, there's also some tourist sites that really do sell out well in advance. I recently visited Summit One Vanderbilt, which is one of the newer platforms where you can view the entire city, and I bought those tickets, I want to say almost a month in advance, really just hoping for good weather at the end of the day, but they were sold out within a week before me coming to the city. And I just don't want you guys to have to experience that because there's so much to do, but it all does take a little bit of planning beforehand because things get busy, girl. For my next recommendation, let's talk about eating here in the city. This tip is do not trust just TikTok and Instagram for all of your food suggestions. Personally, I think that activities are a little bit different because you can kind of just see what the activity is on TikTok or Instagram, even with the short form videos, and then you can make a decision on whether or not that's a place you'd like to see or be interested in visiting. But food is a little different, and I'm going to tell you why. When it comes down to it, restaurants and bars can just pay creators to come to the spaces and just give you a review that they wouldn't otherwise give you if they weren't sponsored or being paid. So a lot of the touristy spots that have gone viral in New York City are really gimmicky, and that does not mean that the food is always going to be the best or worth your time. Now, if you're interested in things that are purely just aesthetic versus like actual good food content, then that's on you, and you're more than welcome to follow all of the IG guides and TikTok all the time. But I just think this is something to think about, as I was victim to going to one of these ramen places, and I'm not necessarily going to mention the name. The food was okay, but when I tell you guys the service was the absolute worst, that I can't see how they would ever survive in business other than TikTok and Instagram generating income for them, I'll just be honest and say that it was not a good experience. So I want you guys to look out for those things and keep your mind open. Now, I'm not saying don't use TikTok or Instagram. I'm just saying make sure you also include Google review searches and Yelp searches, and also word of mouth. Ask people at the hotels you're staying at, ask friends, good restaurants they've been to, because ultimately we're trying to have good food experiences, not just looks good through the phone food experiences and not to your taste buds, if that makes sense. So this next section is for the girlies, and sometimes the boys too, but mostly for the girlies. We're going to talk about fashion here in the city that is the capital of fashion. It's definitely a city that experiences extremes, as it's right off of the water, so it can be really windy, pretty cold in winter, pretty hot in summer, very humid. So I definitely suggest doing your research beforehand and checking to see what the weather forecast looks like, and also understanding that weather has a little bit of a different meaning here. With most places, at least in my experience growing up in California, you don't really have to experience the weather that often, if that makes sense, because you kind of go from your house, get in your car, go to the building that you're going to be in. But in New York, because you use public transportation and a lot of your existence is going to be walking, you want to make sure that you are paying attention to that weather report, because the weather can make and break your day. My suggestion for when packing beforehand is make sure you're packing a lot of layers, especially when visiting in the winter. Between the subway, walking up and down stairs, and then just being out and about and moving in the city, your body temperature can really fluctuate. So it's important to recognize that when you're packing, and also same thing for summer. When you're walking around and you get really, really hot, you'll want to be able to shed layers, but when you're going inside of buildings that'll most likely be cool and not humid, you're going to want to add light sweaters or light jackets. So pay attention to that weather regardless of the fit. So this one is really for my hardcore fashion girlies. Now, don't hate me for saying this, right? Understand that not all of New York City is just fashion. I know that when you're packing your bag beforehand, you're probably thinking, ooh, these fits need to go off every day. And they can, but also make sure you have some functional added elements to your fashion, because when walking around all day and being in the sun and being out and about, you're not going to want to just have outfits that are just aesthetically pleasing on Instagram. You're going to want to have things that work. Something that's so important to recognize is you're going to want good shoes. It's even taken me a minute to come to this conclusion because best believe whenever I've come to New York, I've always wanted to throw on fits. But you can believe my blisters when I tell you that that will really ruin your day and you'll no longer want to go out, do anything, see anything, and you'll be done. I really admire New Yorkers because they've seemingly found this cohesion between functional fashion and things that are like trendy and interesting to look at. And that's a whole nother video topic with a whole nother concept. But just know that you're going to want to have function when you're being a tourist and moving about here in the city. Okay, so this next tip, you guys, is still for fashion, but it's from my little cousin Morgan, who just visited me while I was staying here in Brooklyn, and she came up with a really good one. It is, make sure you pack your bag beforehand with the knowledge that you are going to have more stuff added by the end of your trip. Now, let me explain. If you like clothes, you are going to need more room in your suitcase. There are so many places. If you're a thrift girly, New York, there's tons of thrifting. If you're a high fashion girly, there's so many high fashion houses and everything else in between. If you are going to shop, you're going to need more room in your suitcase. I'm saving you so much heartache and struggle at the end of your trip. Just listen. I will say that every time I've come to the city, okay, maybe not every time, but like 80% of the times that I've come to city, I've left with a heavier suitcase than I've come with. And sadly enough, sometimes have had to leave small things behind. So I'm saving you here. Save extra room in your suitcase when you are arriving in New York. And for my final tip, for those of you who stayed watching this long, I really appreciate you. Make sure you go like and subscribe because I have a whole host of other videos, some on this topic, some not. But for my final tip I want to share, it's more of a set your expectations than a tip, but understand that New York City is expensive. And I know you've seen that everywhere and heard that everywhere, but I want to be really honest with you guys in saying like, it takes $6 to even like walk out of your house and get from point A to point B now. So I just want you to have your expectations set. And although that there's plenty of things to do and ways that you can do your research beforehand to save a little bit of money, that you still need to recognize that this city is expensive. So come with that understanding so that you're not stressed out while you're here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a fantastic first time, second time, third time trip to New York. Let me know how it goes down in the comments and let me know if any of these tips were helpful for you. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.